Good morning, everybody. I would like to welcome everyone to our webinar this morning. My name is Jane, and I'm the PCRN Project Manager with the All Ireland Institute for Hospice and Palliative Care. I'm just going to run you through some guidelines for this morning. Just to say, these are relatively small groups set up to allow colleagues to share research and discussions. Webinars are recorded and will be available on the Palliative Hub Professional afterwards. If you'd like to enable captions, please do so at the bottom of the screen. We would ask people to keep themselves on mute during the presentations and rename themselves so everyone can see your name. We will be recording the webinar, but we will not be recording the Q&A session. To move very quickly to introduce Professor Sheila Payne, speaking with us this morning, and Dr. Peter May. Professor Sheila Payne is a health psychologist with a background in nursing. She was formerly director of the International Observatory on End-of-Life Care at Lancaster University and president of the European Association for Palliative Care. Her research expertise is in palliative care and end-of-life care, a multidisciplinary field. Her work is recognised and used to influence policy and practice to improve palliative care throughout the world. Her research focuses on the needs of older people and family caregivers who have cancer and other chronic diseases, evaluation of organisational and service configurations. Her specific research interests focus on the role and experiences of family carers in supporting patients approaching the end of life. We also have with us this morning Dr. Peter May, Adjunct Associate Professor at the School of Nursing Midwifery TCD, that's Trinity College Dublin, and Senior Lecturer in Health Economics in King's College London. Dr. May is a research scientist focusing on the economics of care for people with serious and life-limiting illness. Dr. May works with an interdisciplinary network of collaborators to design and analyse evaluations of interventions for patients and their families. So I'd like to welcome you both this morning. We're delighted to have you along to speak with us about funding, and really intrigued to hear about the secrets for success. So now, Sheila, I'm going to hand over to you, and I'm going to, that should be okay there now for you.
Thank you very much, Jane, and thank you for the warm welcome. So I'm going to be talking specifically about how to apply for large-scale grants from the European Commission. And as Jane said, I'm based at Lancaster University in the UK. So why should we think about applying for European Commission grants? What do they offer? And frankly, is it worth the hassle of applying for such a large project? And those are the kind of topics that I'm going to address. And if we decide it is worth it, then how, when, and where do we develop a bid? And I'll offer some top tips to doing that, particularly about the funding rules and procedures and how to build a consortium, because you need an international consortium to go to that kind of level of bid. And then finally thinking about what makes a good European project compared to one that you would do in your own country. So this is just to reflect that it's been my absolute privilege and pleasure to be involved in 9 European Commission funded projects. I'm not going to go through them all, but I'm going to use one, which is the palliative sedation project, as a kind of example as we go through this presentation. So let's think about, why should we apply for this kind of grant? I mean, the most important thing, I think, is that we're wanting, as researchers, to make an impact on policy and practice at a European level and beyond, a global impact. And this kind of level of grant allows us to do that. So palliative care, of course, is important in the Republic of Ireland, but you might want to be thinking about what other aspects does my research have that is relevant to other parts of Europe and elsewhere. These grants also offer an opportunity to do really large-scale international projects that go beyond boundaries that are regional or national, to think about the big questions. And the other thing that I've really benefited from being part of these projects is learning from my international colleagues, being involved in international groups, and having experience of working in some of the foremost palliative care research centres in Europe. And that's really been quite enriching for my personal experience, but I think also for my career. So the final point I want to make is that compared to each of our individual countries, the European Union has huge resources. So it's around about 95 billion euros is available through the European Commission grants. Now that's divided up in different ways, and we'll come on to talk about it. So to be honest, it's much more than is available or likely to be available in any one of our individual countries. So what are the opportunities that are available? The European Commission has numerous areas of research that span health and environment and basic sciences and applied sciences and implementation. But if we kind of look at them, they basically either research-orientated grants, so the purpose is to do research. They're capacity-building grants, so they may be about fellowships through the European Research Centre, or they're about networks and social actions, and they would be things like Erasmus+. And there are very useful ones, but I'm not going to be talking specifically about those in this talk. So if you go onto the website and take a look, you'll see that the current programme of work is called Horizon Europe. And they tend to have programmes that span a number of years. The current programme lasts 7 years, and it started in 2021 and will end in 2027. And within it, they have what they call missions. And the one that probably is most relevant to us in palliative care is what they call their cancer mission. But there are many other missions that deal with the issues that are important to the European Union, but also to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and to our own countries as well. So we need to think about what that is. And I do urge you to look on their webpage, and you can find out a lot more. So let's move to imagine that you're wanting to develop a bid. So the first thing to do is read the eligibility and funding rules extremely carefully. Make sure that this particular project that you're interested in doing fits within their remit. Look at the properties of a specific call. So they might have a whole mission to do with cancer, but then they will have specific calls which label the topic that they're interested in receiving bids in. And align your goals of research very, very closely with theirs, and look at what's relevant in European policy drivers and challenges. How does that fit with your research? So this is, once again, if you go into the Horizon Europe ones and you look at what are the current calls, the one that I found that is most current is improving the understanding and management of late effects in adolescents and young adults with cancer. Now, there are many, many calls, and they will be open for a certain period. You often get some intelligence about what's coming out in the future. But it's not just apply anyway whenever you want. You have to look for a call that is relevant. So what are the key stages that you need to think about? You need to develop the science and the research questions, and you do that for any grant. Develop your core team and network. And I think you can be doing that at any time while you're scanning the schools, calls and seeing what may be relevant. Once you select a call that's relevant for you, then you could be either you do an outline proposal and you put it in and then you get a bit of feedback and then you put your full proposal in, or sometimes it's a one-stage proposal. Once you know that what you're going to do and maybe you've got feedback, then you write a full proposal, which is a really big, complicated document. And the most important thing is, as well, agreeing on your budget. So let's think about this. So all research needs to have a good research question or a hypothesis, depending on the kind of research that you want to do. You need a really strong rationale why this research needs to be done at a European level, not at a country level. And then, like all research, it has to have the right design for the right research question. And it should be feasible. Is it feasible practically, ethically, culturally, financially, and legally in all the consortium countries that you're going to do? So I'm going to use an example here, which is a palliative sedation project, which was funded after the previous programme, which was called Horizon 2020. And it started in 2019. And we have a little extension because of COVID, so we'll be finishing it next month. So the whole study is exploring the concept of palliative sedation, and I've done a map of Europe showing our consortium countries. So what were the challenges? Why did we say this was a European level study? It's about different legal frameworks, different clinical practices, different public understandings of death and dying and how we talk about them, different research ethical requirements, and huge debates about the ethical dilemmas of palliative sedation and how that relates to euthanasia or not. So if you're developing a proposal, think big, think like a program grant. You will have to have a central aim, of course, but then you put it together in a series of work packages. There's always an administrative package which coordinates. There's usually one which is about definitions or typologies. Sometimes it's called harmonization. So you're trying to develop a definition across different countries. There may be systematic reviews, there may be feasibility or pilot studies, there may be a main study, could be a trial, could be other methods. There's usually a data management or data analysis one. Very importantly, we think about implementation, and we also importantly have dissemination. And I'm going to show you an example. This is the schematic representation of what we call the House of the Palliative Sedation Project. So you can see that we've underpinned it by management. So the basement is management. The walls are dissemination and also an ongoing education, online education program that helps with the dissemination. And within it, we've had systematic reviews, which once again underpin everything, 2 studies, a clinical study and a qualitative study. We've revised some policy recommendations from the AIIHPC, and we've also done across all our countries deliberative workshops understanding the perspectives of clinicians. Think carefully about your language and terms. The proposals are always written in English, but it's probably not the English that you're familiar with. There are all sorts of Horizon Europe jargon like deliverables, milestones, work packages, person months, partners, etc. that mean very specific things. And I urge you to become familiar with them because that's what your project officer will use and that's what your reviewers will understand. So follow all the rules, seek support from your university, the project officer who's based in Brussels, more experienced members of your consortium, and of course the institute. Build your consortium. So you need a core team, obviously, to develop and write your proposal, but the wider consortium is also important. And they drive the proposal development, maintain motivation, and absolutely hit all the deadlines. If you're 1 minute late, you will not be able to submit your proposal. Calculate and recalculate the budget with your finance officers. And they also have something called person months, which is really important to get your head round. Be careful not to have too many people. So enough, but what's their expertise and what does their CV contribute? So not just your best buddies. You need a balance between experienced and novice researchers. You need different parts of Europe, not just the people you know in Western Europe. Gender balance is really important in all parts of your team. You absolutely have to have the skills required to deliver the project. If your project is about physiotherapy, you must have physiotherapists as part of your project. Think about how you're actually going to recruit if you're doing a clinical study. And in some projects, you will also need to have businesses like what they call SMEs, small and medium-term enterprise. And you also need international organizations that across Europe, and they may be patient representative or disease-specific organizations. So build your consortium, not just people that you know. So experience with managing projects is really useful. It's really useful if their universities also know how to have. They're enthusiastic, hardworking, deliver on time, which is absolutely essential, attend meetings online and in person, and are collaborative. So this is our team from the Palliative Sedation Project. So let's think about what makes a good European project. It needs to address important international topic, links to the European Union policy, addresses what are contemporary problems, and addresses whatever the call is. It must be a good match. It uses the language of the call. It has an excellent consortium members, excellent science, and it is feasible, and the budget must be equitable and accurate. Just don't give all the money to yourself, and look really, really carefully about how you present it. So these are finally some personal reflections. It's been my privilege, as I said, to work with many teams. I've learned so much, and literally I have worked with some great people in Europe. It's really challenged my taken for granted ways to do things. I've been to lots of places, tried lots of different food and drink, which has been really good fun. It's expanded my networks. It's tried to make me a little bit more culturally sensitive. I'm still working on that. Increase my publications, increases your profile, and yes, it really has an impact. What are the downsides? Well, it really are huge amounts of work, and it used to be an awful lot of traveling. Now a lot of meetings are online. And there's a potential to get things wrong because most people will be using English as a second language, and cultural expectations really differ. And you need to manage all the reporting and other requirements and timesheets and so on. And I put not enough for sleep. So my researchers are asleep. I'm working in this picture. So thank you very much for your attention. And I want to acknowledge the funding for the Palliative Sedation Project. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sheila. That was absolutely fascinating. I already have a list of questions myself for you. So thank you very much for your contribution. You covered an awful lot of material there in a very short amount of time. So thank you very much. We'll move on to the second half of the webinar. And Peter, I'm going to let you take it away.
Thanks, Jane. Can you hear me okay?
We can indeed. Thank you very much.
Good. So good morning, everybody. So That is a hard act to follow from Sheila. A really excellent presentation on the sort of the big fish of EU funded studies. And so I suppose my job is to give a slightly different perspective as somebody who has worked most of their academic career in Ireland. And so I also have some experience of national funding opportunities in the south and participation in EU grants from a more like running a work package without that kind of that leadership experience that that Sheila has. So just briefly by way of context for people who I haven't met, so I'm a health economist. I worked in Trinity for 12 years as a research assistant, PhD student, a postdoc, and then a PI. But crucially, for all of that time, 100% of my salary came from competitively won research funding. So I've submitted a lot of grant applications in Ireland and internationally, and managed to win some of them. More recently, I am now, at King's. That's where my full-time position is. And now I have an academic position where I'm applying for grants, mostly worrying about building a team. So I also have some experience of going for the UK money, which may be relevant to people in the north, so we can talk a little bit about, although Sheila, of course, would be able to speak to that as well. Briefly to acknowledge some limitations. These are only the sort of the experiences and biases of one person. We'll never really know what the key factors were in identifying these the things that have happened, but this is my best interpretation of it. So just a little bit more on the different kinds of grants that you can go for in Ireland, in my experience, and the different kind of things we've had success with. So this, as I say, is my sort of career path, a PhD funded by the HRB and the NIH in America, then as a kind of a postdoc co-applicant to successful applications to Europe and the HSE. And then as a PI, I've been successfully PI on 3 HRB applications worth about probably $750,000 or something. And then a similar volume as a co-applicant and collaborator. More EU trials. So I've worked on 4 EU trials in total and done quite a lot of things in America as well. For reasons of time and everybody's boredom threshold, I'm going to focus on those sort of middle 2 columns there. So for people thinking about trying to perhaps finishing a PhD or trying to get into research post PhD, and then that kind of transition to independence. So thinking first about that kind of postdoc co-applicant kind of position, so you're perhaps not leading the research project applications yet, but you're becoming involved in them, or you want to become involved, or you have opportunities to become involved. I think that the things I would emphasize as good ideas are definitely do put yourself forward for opportunities. That if your ambition is to lead research projects one day, then you need to have been a co-applicant in most cases, like the HRB, for example, to give you any money at all, really requires you to have been previously on a successful grant application. We can argue about whether that's a good criterion or not, but it's there. And grant applications are time consuming and hard work, and so definitely use your time wisely. We were talking a bit about this before we started today, that there is, particularly if you're on a research track, there is a kind of an instinct to try to apply for everything because you don't know what is going to fly. But you should be somewhat selective, because otherwise it can simply take up all of your time and you're not doing your current job. So try to prioritize those people and teams and ideas that seem like they will be both impactful and good experiences to work on. And of course, overlapping with a lot of what Sheila said, you're then building your network for when you're a bit further down the career path as well. At that stage, the big things to avoid are, don't get stuck writing the whole thing. If you're going to write the whole thing, then you should be the PI. So make sure that you're standing your ground and only doing the things that you're qualified for and are proportionate to your role. and just be really wary of timing. I think anybody who's in academia long enough has been involved, have been asked, oh, we've just noticed there's 50,000 going spare at so-and-so an NGO. The deadline is on Thursday morning and we're going to start writing the application now. Just don't even bother, because there's one of the key secrets to success is in any grant application is to be started nice and early, I think. In thinking about then the sort of the next career stage as a PI, or perhaps applying for HRB grants, fellowship career development opportunities, NIHR, so the postdoc career fellowships and so on. I think the biggest thing again is to start early. If you wait until the call's open and then put pen to paper, then you are going to have to do really, really well to make any progress. As the HRB has improved a lot in my time working in Ireland, that now you've got a pretty good idea what calls there are going to be and when they're going to be coming out well in advance. The HRB calls often work on like a 2 or 3 year cycle. So you want to know when they're coming out, because if you miss the deadline, you could be waiting a long time for the next one. So have a good idea what's coming when. Things like Wellcome Trust Europe, they tend to be perhaps more regular in how they come round, but have a good understanding what's coming when. Have your best sort of ideas sketched out in a book, and make sure that you've got a rough idea of what ideas you want to apply to the different opportunities. I don't want to repeat everything Sheila said about the sort of, making sure that you understand the call, that you are eligible and so on, but all of those things are obviously vital. I would emphasize you want to be in contact with your research office from very early as well, that your scientist colleagues can help you understand what kind of study you should be doing. But research offices, certainly in my time in Trinity, are a vital source of kind of administrative support and savvy. And I mean, my own perspective would be that actually the application process itself for any significant amount of money is complex enough that you probably want a Gantt chart for it, to understand you're putting all of the pieces together. And a month before the deadline, a good draft of the proposal and a good draft of the budget, I think, is a really good place to start. I agree with everything Sheila said about the need to build a team and a consortium. You should be maintaining links with those people you've worked with before productively and who have a role to play in whatever your project idea is. But you don't need to staff it like Noah's Ark and bring absolutely everybody you've ever met along. I think that it's worth bearing in mind that certainly the HRB now, and the NIHR as well, is the project teams are so interdisciplinary. So the last HRB grant I won as a PI, we only were looking for 2 years worth of money, about less than 200,000 euros, I think. And yet we've got 12 co-applicants on the application, because we've got economists, we've got qualitative people, we've got specialists in the sort of clinical service area, with PPI, with policymakers, with service providers, with NGOs. So all of those people is playing a well-defined role. Again, you can't just throw everybody you've ever met in, but actually you will probably need 6, 8, 10 people playing a well-defined role if you're asking the HRB for any amount of money. And that's what the HRB, the SFI, etc., will expect. It's always worth talking to people who have won these grants before. They will almost certainly share their experiences. If you're lucky, they might actually share their proposal. And people who put together a serious application and missed out often have very good perspectives as well. One final thing it's easy to overlook when you're the PI is make sure it's something that you actually want to do, that you think will have impact, that you think is worthwhile, because you're going to be the one doing it. So if you don't have true faith in it at the outset, you will regret that round about the start of year 2. I think in terms of don'ts, I think feasibility is a big one. Probably a lot of people will have been shown when they were doing their PhD the paper that's along the lines of it's a PhD, it's not a Nobel Prize. And it's obviously a perennial problem for PhD students, early career researchers, to be anxious to overachieve, but arguably it's the case all the way through an academic career that we're often trying to do too much. And I think another key characteristic of like the maturing of Irish funding landscape over the last 10 years has been feasibility is now very highly prized. I've already said don't sort of bring everybody you've ever met on board. Don't start at the last minute, although finishing at the last minute and submitting 5 minutes before the deadline may be unavoidable because there's always last minute gremlins. I think it's by the time you reach the stage where you're the PI, it's often sort of vulnerable to being very overinvested, taking it quite personally, and I think that door can swing both ways. So if you're successful in 1 or 2 grants, you might assume that means you're set, but if you're still on a research track, then that's definitely not the case. So it's worth being wary of that. And certainly in my experience, the HRB sort of career path doesn't really exist, and so you need to have other pathways to an academic career. Essentially, academic opportunities such as lecturing jobs in different universities on the island will appear almost entirely independently of any funding grants you might win. But if you've won funding as a co-applicant, or better still as a PI, you'll be very well positioned for those when they come up. On the other hand, if you're not successful, then don't take that too much to heart either, as funding research activity grows, but funding envelopes stay the same size. Competitiveness increases, and so depending on the call, you might have a 5 to 20% success rate. So even if you're really good at this and you succeed twice as often as the average person, then you can still easily put in 2 or 3 very good applications that don't go anywhere. I'd also say from my own experience that you should persist, keep going, because there's a big learning curve relatively early in a career. So of the 3 HRB grants I held as a PI, the first one was a management nightmare because I completely failed to follow any of the advice on this slide, and overwrote a very, very ambitious project that then was very difficult to follow through on. But in the subsequent 2 grants that we submitted, I kind of knew we were going to get funded when we put them in, because we'd done all the work, we had done all of this careful planning, we'd written all of the aspects within an inch of its life, we had the right team, we had the right idea. And so you never know for sure, but I always felt we had a very, very good chance. So you have to sort of learn by doing. If the first one doesn't fly, then try again. And then at some point, I'm sure you'll find success. Briefly on EU consortia, Sheila's already covered it with much more sort of detail and experience than I can offer. But as I say, I've been involved in a few trials on a specific work package, basically as the economics methodologist on clinical trials. I mean, I think Ireland is a good place to do this, and in the Irish context, EU money is relatively large, relatively gettable pots of money often. They are serious, hard exercises, though, going for big European money. So I've also been involved in a number of ones that didn't get funded, and I probably could have told you they weren't going to get funded at the first meeting. So you need to pick carefully your partners, who are the people who have the best ideas, the best project management to get the funding through. Sheila's already alluded to some of the admin associated with EU projects, which is at times beggars belief. So if, like me, you have a department administrator who is basically the only thing between your university and martial law, then it's essential to keep them on side, because they do so much important work to keep the funders happy. One thing that's unusual about EU compared to HRB, for example, is you can kind of put yourself out there a little bit more. People are looking to build international consortia. They will want Irish partners often for geographical representation, for a native English-speaking participants, and so on. So think about what you would offer Are you wanting to run a clinical site? Are you a statistician or an economist or a qualitative person, a policy impact person? What of those work packages Sheila listed 5 minutes ago? What's one that you could run? And then make people aware that you're out there to provide that kind of thing. I put it in amber because I wouldn't do it myself necessarily, but you can actually start putting your profile up on the European Commission websites for not only for palliative care, but for any cause you like, saying you are out there with these expertise looking for partners. Of the don'ts, again, really steer clear of anything that hasn't been well written months before the deadline, because it's just the reality of doing these things well. And to Sheila's point of the English language as it is used in European Commission grant writing, that is an experience. So you don't want to try to start writing huge swathes of an EU grant without having first been involved in a few of them. And even if it's your first one, writing a work package, look at what your colleagues have written for their work packages, because there is a special style. Very briefly on a couple of other opportunities that I had experience of during my time in Trinity. So there are the sort of very high status investigator grants through ERC and Wellcome, both of which I had experience of going some way through the process, but not to the very end of the process, unfortunately. So those are calls whereby there's a lot of money, a huge amount of independence and autonomy, but as you would expect, the corollary of that is they're extremely competitive and hard to get, and a lot of work. I'd say probably you need 18 months to write a good ERC investigator grant, or depending on the Wellcome calls, 12 to 18 months. Yeah, so you really those are worth looking at if you're confident in those kind of opportunities, but you need to be ready to lay the groundwork. Just a brief note on American things, which people are sometimes interested in. I've been fortunate to do a lot of stuff in America because I did part of my PhD there. America is great for some things, so it's obviously where all the Nobel Prizes get given out, and for good reason, that the standard of science and intellectual excellence is very high. And because of America being what it is, it's a way to get papers into big journals, to get citations, to raise career profile. It's not really a way you could do a very good study on how they should do palliative care in America, and it will not get you into the Irish Department of Health, because neither the health system nor the population are generalizable. It's also not actually a good source of money, which people sometimes find counterintuitive. Basically because the American federal agencies don't like sending money out of the country. So you get very mean overhead. So your department wouldn't be happy to have you employed full-time on an American funding, even if you were able to win it, in my experience. And the American funders normally don't want overseas PIs. That's possibly not a golden rule, but it is pretty strong. Actually, perhaps surprisingly, the American systems are also incredibly bureaucratic. They give the EU a run for their money. So for all of those reasons, my experience is it's much better to work with American partners who will do all of the paperwork, who will be able to access the data that you as a non-US person may not be able to access. And then you're able to provide your expertise, contribute a little bit, and get the benefits of the papers and the exposure. So in summing up, there's an awful lot of ways that you can spend time writing grants as an academic on the island of Ireland, north and south. Some calls specific to our jurisdictions, some Europe-wide, and some further afield again. You shouldn't and can't try to do everything, so it's just critical to understand the landscape, the different funders, their opportunities when those are coming up, have a rough plan of how those opportunities fit with your ideas and ambitions, so that when the calls come round, you're well positioned to move forward in terms of the science and your co-applicant team. I think that we all understand that big research grants are like complex scientific projects, but it's only when you're doing them, I think they're sort of complex relationally as well. So you need to have large teams with lots of different expertise and lots of different perspectives. And early in your career, figuring out where you fit in. Later in your career, figuring out how to put together teams like that are important skills. I think that certainly when I was an undergraduate, I was told the best thing you could do with an essay was put it in a drawer 2 weeks before the deadline and then take it out 2 days before, and you'd find 10 or 20 typos and 10 or 20 ways to improve a sentence. I tell that to my students now, but I wonder how many of us actually do that as academics with our papers or our grant applications. It's still a great discipline, a great skill to have. Have your ideas done early, put it in a drawer and look at it afresh before you have to submit it. You'll find ways to strengthen it for sure. One final note on the sort of the tension between the research track and the academic post is that research is sort of great way to develop and embellish your career. It's also a great way to get impact in the world, but it is very hard to impossible to have a pure research career in the long run in Ireland. So it is worth balancing these research interests against the other sort of types of academic citizenship that can lead to permanent posts. An exception would be if you think you can get an ERC investigator or a welcome investigator award, then the university will probably come to you scattering rose petals at your feet. And that's all from me.
That was wonderful, Peter. Thank you so much. That was really, really insightful. And I have heard the tip of putting a good draft in a drawer. And what I like about it is a drawer as opposed to somewhere safe where it might never be found again. So we're very quickly going to move to questions and answers. Just give me one